All right,
Okay.
go ahead.
So the idea that this is an idea for kind of usefulness for me that I think will be better if there's more people kind of contributing to this. So the idea is to start putting together Pluto notebooks as like comprehensive tutorials. And my goal is to try and break down the pipeline of a deep learning task into core components that are consistent across every task, whether it's classification or image generation or segmentation, trying to extract some like key components. So data preparation, model building, training and validation, things like that. And then the goal is to put together Pluto notebooks as comprehensive tutorials for some of these key tasks. And then also to put together more of like a deep dive on these core components where because the in my opinion the one of the more challenging parts about Julia is that there isn't a bunch of mono repos that kind of explain clearly how to make everything fit together. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with web dev at all, but I think some sort of copy and paste style like component library for deep learning that kind of copies a little bit of what ShadCN for UI components and web dev. It's kind of the vision behind this, and I can dive more into that. Um, but with that, I have a lot of questions on um, kind of what are the most important tasks that I should really make sure to address. Are there a set of core components that would be consistent across every deep learning pipeline? And then dive in a little more into specific questions around that stuff. So hopefully that's a decent overview.
Yeah. No, that's good. So in the end, you'll have like a website that hosts all of this, um, presumably.
Yeah, so this is already up. So the GitHub is all of this is like a rough skeleton, but this is already up on a website where this is something me and Connor Burns have been working on. So connected but adjacent to this specific machine learning task. But yeah, all the Pluto notebooks, they're hosted and they can be interactive also. So we'll probably for like data preparation and stuff, we'll have interactivity with sliders and all that.
Yeah, I think the um, main motivation, which is to have a place that is comprehensive across all the different repos in Julia that go into a machine learning pipeline, having a description of that somewhere is something we've wanted um, for a long time. I think it is definitely needed. So, um, when this, even if it's not completely up and ready, but as pieces of this come together where you think, um, let's say maybe you have one of the tutorials done end to end, and you're slowly adding stuff, we can start to link it, from the Flux website and docs. Um, what do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
Um, it, one thing in terms of components. So I am curious, Dale, about your thoughts on the existing component libraries that are out there. The big one being Flux Training, for example, which
Hmm.
was kind of developed with this idea in mind. FastAI.jl less so, but it is really a component-based library at heart, even though the way you interact with it is usually at that kind of high level instead of with the individual components.
Yeah, that would be something for me to explore a little deeper. I think just coming from the web development side of things, the simplicity of like copy and pasting and kind of owning that portion of your code has really taken off. And when I think about deep learning, there's so much that goes into a good pipeline. and having to make it all fit into like a Flux training sort of setup or a fast AI sort of setup, or um, what would be another kind of common setup, that I guess a PyTorch Lightning, or structuring it in a way where it has to adhere to some sort of monorepo, or maybe not a monorepo, but some sort of system. I I don't know if that's something that I'm drawn towards. I think diving into like seeing how you can take a data set from the raw URL, set it up for like with ML utils, show the pre-processing, all of that. I know I love that. And then going in and seeing like core components where if you want to use augmenter or data augmentation.jl, what would that look like? And then you can just copy and paste that into the starting tutorial that you started with. And so I kind of wrote this a little bit in the discourse announcement. So I said my idea behind this for the intended workflow would be you start with some sort of pre-made tutorial related to your task. Then you customize your training pipeline by integrating parts from the core components that you find useful. So if you want to use Augmenter, for example, instead of writing your own like pre-processing, or I guess data augmentation functions, then you just go over to the core components, you see how that fits in, and then you copy and paste the chunk into your tutorial. So that would be my idea behind it, and I think it makes it a little more clear instead of hiding it behind another library.
So I think the point of clarity here maybe is that, so fast AI would be exactly what you say. It's hiding a lot of stuff behind a library. I would say Flex Training is not that, in that
Gotcha.
it's more, what's a good analogy? It's more like Ignite, if you're familiar with that in
Hmm.
PyTorch land. It abstracts away a kind of a smaller part of the workflow. That said, it may still be too much abstraction for your taste, in which case that's fine. I would say a good analogy is maybe from the web dev side, if you work with Next, right? That
Hmm.
builds on top of React, that gives you a framework, but it doesn't shoehorn you into a super prescriptive way of doing things. Of course, you can still, but you're not forced to. In terms of that kind of copy and paste ability, one thing we had, or we still have, but is the model zoo. One
Hmm.
problem with the model zoo that we had is that nobody maintained it basically. Like there are just not enough pans to go around to maintain it. So in that sense, the most direct comparison I see with what you're doing now, it would be that model zoo. And what I wonder is if this approach can be kind of kept up to date and refreshed, if the parts of the model zoo that kind of overlap with it should go away. Now the question is always about maintenance, right? How
Hmm.
how do you keep these things going long term? Because frankly, right now, our level of capacity is keeping the lights on for the core libraries and not being able to do stuff like refreshing the models.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. That's something I've been thinking about too, because right now I'm in my grad program, and so I know for the next couple of years this will be very useful, but I'd like to set it up in a way where it doesn't just drop off. Um, so I guess I one of the I think ways that that could be accomplished in my mind is the simplicity of the fact that they're just Pluto notebooks. Um, they're kind of in my mind, the fact that it's a Pluto notebook for this tutorial, for example, this is all you need for the image segmentation tutorial. I think that does really simplify a big chunk of the maintenance burden. When it comes to actually building in like the core components, I think that's going to be a much more difficult thing because then you have to keep track of, okay, well, did augmenter.jl make updates? Did data augmentation make updates? Did all these things make updates? And you have to kind of keep these notebooks up to date. So I could see that being a challenge for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think the models you also suffered from somewhat, it was made a long time ago, and it kind of shows that because the dependency management is all over the place, stuff is pinned properly. It uses older APIs. So I see that's one leg up you'd have with Pluto and the automatic manifest and project versioning that it does. And again, I don't have the answers about how to keep this maintained. I wish I did. Then we could keep the models are maintained too, right? But yeah, it may I don't know. One idea we had was, for example, being able to do some sort of automated testing to ensure the code doesn't bit rot over time. So at least we can
Mhm.
incrementally keep stuff updated. But if you have any ideas on that front, obviously, um, I guess we'll be watching to see kind of what you come up with there.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, the nice part is Connor and I are building this actual platform ourselves. And so we're also thinking through that of, can we incorporate continuous like testing through this, or link, because it's already linked to GitHub, the whole platform that we're building. And so can we utilize GitHub in ways that we're not already, because this is all so new and we're kind of at just the basics of this platform. So that, yeah, it's almost just a good, for us, it's a good way to experiment with the features that we want to implement in this platform itself. Um, but I guess getting to, assuming this is the direction that I start to head down, I have some questions because I'm kind of limited in my domain knowledge to like medical image segmentation, classification, and maybe a couple other things. But when I think about this, I think it would be useful to have a somewhat comprehensive computer vision oriented repo. And so as I'm thinking about how I want to build this out, I think some key questions I have are, what are some of the most important computer vision tasks that should require a whole comprehensive tutorial? Can we break down pretty much all computer vision tasks into some key core components? So kind of like this, and maybe that's where Flux training will be useful for me to look at. And then maybe these are some questions that I can just ask on the Zulip to not take up too much time in this meeting. But do we have, if we can get kind of this part down and then this part down, then I could ask for input on what are some libraries that should definitely be included when it comes to these core components. And I think a good example is like a model building library comparing Flux and Lux. I know Lux has some of that on um, their docs page, but I definitely had to spend quite a bit of time making some things work within that. So I guess, does anyone have ideas on maybe some of the most important computer vision tasks? And then are there some core components that would cover the entire pipeline?
Um, well, I think the two that you've listed are the big ones for sure. Another one I would add on there is object tracking.
Mhm. I think something
May
maybe generative.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
So, because I also don't want to overextend myself. And so if I got, let's say, these four down, is there anything that would be like a glaring gap?
I can't think of one. I don't know about you, Brian.
Neither can I. As long as we're sticking to vision, NLP is its own can of worms, which we
Yeah.
may not want to open. And
Yeah,
I
I'm
do
not.
think,
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm not worried about that for now.
Mhm. And I would say in terms of keeping this sustainable, if it's stuff that you work with and use cases you're familiar with, that definitely helps. I think one problem we've also had is that, for example, I don't do any computer vision work. So when it comes down to keeping the vision models and the model zoo maintained, I have to go through and slog through and remember what they do every time.
Mm,
It just helps if that's something you're kind of living and breathing, or at least something you have a lot of expertise in, where the subject matter part of it is kind of natural to you, and then the only part you have to worry about is really the using the libraries.
yeah, yeah, and that I think that's why a lot of these will have some sort of medical imaging emphasis, because that is my research right now.
Okay, so I guess in terms of core components,
And then I'll pull this up just to. So I kind of have it. I this is all a rough idea, but I went through one image segmentation um kind of full tutorial, and I think as far as image segmentation goes, these are going to be pretty standard components where you have like I didn't include setup as a component, so that's just like environment and stuff. But you have some sort of data preparation, some sort of model building, some sort of like training and setting up like the validation part, and then some sort of model evaluation on like test images. And then the fifth component that I didn't include in that would be like model deployment and inference. Those were the ones that I thought of. I think they're pretty comprehensive when it comes to segmentation, but I don't know if there's other stuff that I'm not thinking of.
I mean, I would say that's the standard phases of a pipeline for pretty much any task.
Good. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm hoping. Find some sort of
Um,
core components that'll translate.
yeah, and I guess maybe somewhere in there, I don't know if you consider it part of training and validation or like where in 3, 4, and 5 it fits in, but I guess storage and saving
Mm,
saving the model in a way that you can pick up where you left off.
yeah, I would say so almost like maybe checkpointing.
Yeah, I mean, simple checkpointing would just be like saving the weights in the optimizer state, but like if you're thinking about end-to-end stuff, you know, um, like I at least for me, like I would do like a run and then I'd be saving um additional metadata about the previous stages of the pipeline as well. So
Got
like
it.
thinking about
So
storage more so than just saving the weights, but really in a way that makes the entire pipeline reproducible.
gotcha. So what else would need? So obviously params, states, what else would be super like common?
The I guess like the or the parameters of your data pipeline, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like image size or augmentation, random transforms and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about this as something you need to hand off, um, like I would call it like a model config, um, which basically describes how to instantiate the model. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, an additional in addition to model states, you also want the optimizer states,
Mm-hmm.
and scheduling and that kind of thing.
Yeah, this will be good. My plan for some of this stuff is to, after the meeting, throw this out into the Zulip chat and just see what sort of skeleton I can get put together.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good. I think you already have a bunch of good libraries listed on there.
Great. Okay, well then I'll hop off soon. I guess the last question I had, are there, so when I'm thinking about building out this pipeline, I want to start as low level as possible. With like some of the core things that are always going to be used, like ML utils and stuff like that. And so I liked starting from this URL, downloading the data from the URL, setting up the ML utils like data loaders and stuff like that. Are there any other, so I know ML utils is going to be like critical for doing something like that. ML datasets is another big core library that kind of handles most of that already. Are there any other data set things that I should be aware of?
I think there are packages out there, but I don't actually use any of them in practice. Like those would
Mhm.
be the two big ones that I found myself using consistently over the couple of years for Julia, at least.
Okay, that's great. That's been my experience too. So great. Thank you guys.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, excited to see how this turns out. Um, well, that was the only thing we had on the agenda. Brian, I didn't know if you wanted to discuss anything else since we have time.
I did not. Um, I don't know. Is anyone else on the line? Julian, did you have anything you wanted to discuss?
Nope, I was just listening in.
Okay.
Okay.
One note maybe
Yeah.
while we're here is I did receive an email that GSOC applications for non-focus the lists need to be in by February 5th. I think we have that one idea we talked about at the previous meeting on Metalhead. And then I think we want to come up with another one, maybe more on the compute or kernel rating side. That could be something we talk about either today or offline on Zulip or elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get that last email. I did respond to the original one, letting Henry and Irfan know that we'd be participating under their umbrella, but I haven't heard anything back.
Mhm.
So yeah, just if you get any emails, keeping in mind that we've missed emails in the past from them, just let me know.
Yeah, I've been checking them more frequently for that exact reason. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ideas we already discussed, either one of us can add it to the website. Julian, did you want to discuss the kernel stuff on call?
Not which one specifically? Which kernel thing?
That's the question. So right now we have on the GSOC page a carryover from last year is the writing Julian native kernels for common neural network operations. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
if that still makes sense this year, so that's kind of my question to you is that still something that is appealing this year, or would we want to swap it out for something else or remove it completely?
Yeah, I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't really know what needs to be prioritized right now for the ecosystem. So you guys just let me know. And if you want to just take it off there, feel free. I'm happy to help with stuff like that, but I'm just not, yeah, I'm not kind of up to date on things in the fluxml ecosystem right now.
Well, so Brian, why were you thinking that this is not as appropriate this year?
I don't remember. I think it was something about, in terms of priorities, it's not clear where we'll land with, for example, the AD situation and what that'll require when it comes to writing rules and what level of granularity we write rules at. If we end up with very high level functions, then writing kernels for them may make sense. But if we end up with a bunch of pieces that we compose together that are even lower level than we have now, then maybe that's more difficult. So like writing a single kernel for a normalization layer would make sense if your normalization layer is one operation. But if for whatever reason, it turns out it would be better to write as like 50 operations and then have some other optimizer or have the AD figure out how to handle that, then that it doesn't, like, the work might be wasted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, but at least just over the years with respect to that kind of optimization with respect to Fusion or AD is something that at least hasn't been borne out, where yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, for all of these things, it's not like they're currently like super slow or something like that. They're just currently in CUDA or cuDNN or whatever. So it's not like we're like dying for a Julia kernel. So it makes sense that, yeah, whatever we write should be something that will actually be useful long term.
Mm-hmm. And it's
Yeah,
also
so
that,
I can see your point.
yeah, another, maybe I think there are actually places where we are slower, and that because we're not covered by cuDNN. So thinking of, again, the normalization layers, where if you look in PyTorch, they actually have, what was it? I think they have like manually handwritten fused kernels
Yeah, you're
for
thinking
that.
of stuff other than batch norm.
Yeah, I think there's one for layer norm, for group norm as well. So that is one area where we can invest in it. But the question is, like if given the finite amount of time you have with the GSOC and the kind of the learning curve for writing that kind of kernel, is this something that makes sense for GSOC? We have it on the list, but last year we didn't get any applications for this. So I'm just keeping that in mind for this year.
Right.
And that's kind of the question I was posing to Julian and anyone else who's working on kind of the GPU side, is also just trying to find places where we can have easier to write kernels, for lack of a better term, or easier to write optimizations. That could be a more accessible GSOC project, but that also tackles some of the bottlenecks we have. And that's yet another thing, is that we've had less signal over the past year about kind of what are the bottlenecks people have been running into recently. Most of them are stuff like convolutions on CPU, which is not really a GPU specific thing anymore at that point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think even if we were to offer this, we'd be in a position where either the candidate would have to be a stellar candidate and really drive the project themselves and have their own expertise that they're bringing to the situation here, or it would have to be one where Julian, you, Brian, and I, we'd have to like sit down probably before the GSOC and actually come up with more like concrete, actionable items to guide the student. I guess basically what I'm saying is like, in terms of you helping out, it would be one that required perhaps more bandwidth from you, let's say, than just giving advice and stuff, maybe more actually helping the student with some of the GPU side of things. So I don't know if you have that kind of bandwidth either.
My bandwidth is always less than I say it is. I agree on sitting down to write things out and kind of figuring out both what the pain points are and then possible things that a GSOC student could do to help resolve them. Whether I have time for that for a GSOC, I think I do. I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe if we wrote down the things that are outstanding and some possible solutions, then if I might find something where I'm like, okay, yeah, I can devote a good bit of time to that and do active mentorship, mostly like something that I already understand well. Because if it involves like the mathematics of automatic differentiation, it's like that's not something I'm good at. But if it's, how do I take a algorithm and then make it run pretty fast as, kernel abstraction kernels, like I can probably do that decently well. Or, of course, like distributed or multi-threaded stuff, like I know how to do that. So I just need to find something that I'm good at, basically, to be able to commit a good bit of time to it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So I guess then, Brian, given everything that we discussed, do we want to commit the time to putting together that list before the February 5th deadline?
That is a good question. So I guess the question is, do we need to commit to we already have a list. Do we need to commit to a specific list before the deadline? Or can we defer that to afterwards? Because if we're okay with creating a list and the only concern is we might need more time to do it, and we're okay with doing the project if it comes to that, then I'd say we should do it. Yeah, that's my take on it. Like if we're okay with the project, then it's really just a question about finding the time to create the list. We already have a list that I think passes muster, even though it may not be the final list that students come up with. And that should be good to go. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess let's just leave the project pretty much as is. Just do like a once over when we update the other project. And then if we actually get bites for this particular project before the student submission deadline, then the three of us can maybe sit down, actually put together a list, so that we know whether we want to accept those students by the time the deadline rolls around. Because if it turns out to be a list that, let's say, none of us feel like we can strongly take an active role in, then yeah, that's not a GSOC that we want to do. So, I mean, yeah, sounds like basically before February 5th, just update the one project and do a once over of this.
Yep, I put an action item for myself to do that. So,
Okay,
and we
thanks.
already know what we want to do for there, so should be pretty quick. And then I think the only outstanding part is to put our list, put a link to our list in the NumFocus GSOC repository, and I will do that after this call.
Yeah, I mean, they, at least in the past, they check your list before approving the PR.
Okay, well, it's a one-liner, so we can do it at
Yeah.
any time then.
Okay. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, we can end today.
Yes, I actually realized that I have an email from someone interested in contributing to Flux, and a GSOC was not mentioned, but probably that would be maybe relevant. Who can I forward this email to, or like add on to this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could add me for sure, and then probably Brian too. I'll
I feel like maybe it's more straightforward also to direct them towards Zulip.
Yeah,
Or
that would be
Slack.
preferred.
Yeah, email just
Okay.
so we can avoid the email back and forth.
Yeah,
But if
okay.
if they don't show up, then yeah, feel free to forward it.
Sure. Okay, we'll do.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all I've got.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. And we'll see everyone in 2 weeks. Though I actually will be, yeah, we'll see everyone in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
All right. Bye.
Great, thanks everyone.
See ya.